My name is Omri Gazit. I am the co-founder and CEO of Asserto, an authorization company. I also wear another hat, which is the co-chair of the OpenID Auth0 working group. And today I'm going to talk about fine-grained authorization, specifically how it intersects with APIs and gateways. A little bit about myself. I've been building software for developers for well over 30 years. I was fortunate enough to be one of the co-founders of the .NET at Microsoft, as well as Azure, where I was the general manager. Over the last 15 years, been working on open source like OpenStack and Cloud Foundry, whereas I was a board director, and later on Kubernetes, Puppet, and of course Asserto, which is an open source company. It's my third startup. I love startups. When I'm not startuping, I'm skiing. First, a little bit about the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is proving that you are who you say you are, whereas authorization is once you're logged in, what can you do in the context of this application? And authentication, mostly a solved problem. So we have mature standards, OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, SAML. These are all 15, 20 years old at this point. And we have a set of mature developer services. We have Auth0 and Azure Active Directory, Incognito, and so on and so forth. And so no developer has to go build login if they don't want to, and they shouldn't really. Whereas authorization really is still kind of the Wild West. There are really no standards that are at that level of maturity, although Auth0 aims to be OpenID Connect, but for authorization. There are really no developer services like Auth0 mature at scale, although Asserto, my company, is one of at least a half a dozen companies that are trying to do that. And so that means that developers have to roll their own. And there's a lot of pain associated with that. First of all is bad security. Don't take my word for it. The OWASP puts broken access control as #1 on their top 10 list of security vulnerabilities in web apps. And in fact, they say that a whopping 94% of applications they test exhibit some form of broken access control. It also means inconsistency across microservices and how authorization is implemented. It's very difficult to figure out who has permissions to what. And finally, opportunity costs. If developers have to go build their own, that means that they can't focus on things that actually matter to their business. It's not all bad news, though. The tech giants continue to lead the way here, and starting with Google over the last 5 years, a bunch of different tech vendors have published about how they do authorization. Airbnb, Intuit, Netflix, Carta, Uber, Reddit, you name it. There's a company that's written about how they build authorization. And you can distill a set of patterns from what these guys have built and kind of define what we call cloud native authorization, which is different from traditional authorization. And the job of companies like Asserto is to really democratize all those patterns. So, what's changed across the what, the how, and the when. What you used to authorize is, kind of coarse-grained tenant level permission. So are you a viewer on a tenant? How you enforce that was you wrote if and switch statements inside of the relying party or the API code that checked typically whether an access token has a scope or a claim. And of course, you computed which scopes and claims to put in the access token during authentication time. These are all kind of like outdated practices. The cloud native practices are fine-grained, policy-based, and real-time. So if you have three things that you remember from this talk, it's fine-grained, which is resource level permissions. Can a user, execute like a particular permission? Can a user read a document? Policy-based, you're extracting out all of that authorization logic out of the application, and then you're expressing in a domain-specific language, separation of duties. And then real time, right before granting or denying access to a protected resource, you're asking an authorization system, does this user have this permission on this particular resource? The principle of continuous enforcement. There are two ecosystems in the cloud native authorization world today. Policy as code, or ABAC, and policy as data, or REBAC. ABAC stands for attribute-based access control. It's mostly a stateless style of authorization. It has a set of specs that kind of traditionally have undergirded it. And then policy as data, or REBAC, relationship-based access control, was really repopularized by the Google Zanzibar paper that I mentioned. And Auth0 is the first standards effort to really try to unify across all these different patterns, all these different ecosystems. If you look at the open source ecosystems around it, Open Policy Agent, you may recognize that's the most well-known of all of the ABAC open source systems today. On the right side, we have a set of Google Zanzibar inspired implementations. And then Topaz, which I'm partial to because my company is the primary maintainer of the Topaz open source system, but it tries to combine the best of both worlds. It has an OPA basis as well as a Google Zanzibar Reback directory. And I'll show you a demo with Topaz in a little bit here. First, let me go into what an Auth0 payload looks like. Super simple. There's a URL up there that you can click and check out like the current version of the spec. It really details, just a very simple payload format, a subject, an action, and a resource. And then the response payload is as simple as decision true. Of course, it can get a lot more complex than that, but this is like kind of the simplest possible Auth0 call that you can make. We have a growing body of interop work that we've been working on. There's a QR code here that you can scan. There's a website called auth0ninterop.net that basically shows a whole bunch of implementations that implement a to-do scenario. The to-do scenario is a Rick and Morty themed to-do scenario. It has a gateway component as well as a kind of a relying party component. These are the set of policy decision points or authorizers that implement Auth0 today. There's about 15 of them. There are 2 that are joining us in March that are large authorization vendors or large vendors that have authorization products. Not quite at liberty to talk about who they are, but suffice it to say we'll have basically 90% of all the vendors who implement authorization. So this spec is real. API gateways are starting to join the party as well. Tyke has an implementation as well that they're going to demo with us at Gartner IM in London. And so, before I get into the demo, the last thing I want to talk about is, kind of like how we think about Auth0 plugging into existing workflows. The first one is, of course, at the API gateway, where you can ask, the API gateway can ask an Auth0 compliant PDP, does this user have can they execute this HTTP method on this particular HTTP route? And that's a demo I'm going to show. And then if the API gateway passes that along, the backend can then ask a fine-grained authorization question. Can this user say, create a to-do or delete a to-do or update a particular to-do? That's fine-grained authorization. So here's a demo I'm going to show. Here's a QR code that will take you to a blog post that will take you through all of that. We're going to import an OpenAPI spec. We're going to set up a set of relationships and then enforce from the particular gateway that we're using here. So I'm going to switch over to a demo screen here. I'm going to import an OpenAPI spec that I have for that particular to-do service. So I'm going to paste that here, call this Leap. And you'll see that we found 6 endpoints or routes over here. I'm going to go back to the directory and show you kind of how they're in the Asserto product, how they're imported as a set of relationships. So there's an object called a service and a set of endpoints that hang off of it, and a set of relationships with a set of groups. And we have, have a set of protagonists here. Rick is the evil genius, so he can execute any method on any operation on any of these endpoints, whereas Morty is a sidekick and he can't execute deletes. Let's go prove that to ourselves. We're going to take Morty's bearer token here and try to issue a delete against that particular API. That won't work, but if we want to actually entitle Morty, it's as simple as adding a relationship between Morty and that particular endpoint. So let's go do exactly that. I'm going to add a relationship here. I could have entitled an entire group, but I'm going to break the glass and allow Morty to execute this particular API. We're going to test it, and it works. So that's kind of how simple API authorization looks like with OpenID Auth0 and Topaz. Topaz is Topaz is the authorization system that I showed here. Here's a QR code to take you to the repo. It's fast, flexible, and easy. Fast is an authorization a millisecond, or your next one's free, as we like to say. It supports all the models, RBAC, ABAC, REBAC. It's very easy to integrate into your application, SDKs in every language, and of course, integration with a bunch of gateways, including Tyke. And this is a QR code to take us to the Auth0 working group. And if you want to join us, feel free. All you have to do is Basically sign an IPR agreement if you want to contribute to the working group, or if you just want to show up, you don't have to do that. You can just go show up to the Zooms. We meet once a week on Tuesdays. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.